we'll have more opportunities for discussion at the end. And then I'm going to sort of reintroduce the whole book next week as well, and hear a video Advent message from Pastor Duncan next week. So with that said, I think I'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to share my screen with you.
I put us on mute because you were making so much noise.
Yeah, everyone needs to mute themselves, and I successfully have unmuted myself. Kathy, could you allow me to share my screen? It says host has disabled participant screen sharing.
Let me give you the share it. I'll share it with you.
I need the power.
I'm so sorry. Keep talking. Everybody share something. Yeah, shoot.
Yeah, I really, before we look at the content of Pastor Duncan's book, I want to just remind us what our response is to prophetic challenge. And I think Pastor Duncan is offering us a prophetic challenge here. And all too often, when white people in particular are challenged on their racism, our default is shame, to feel ashamed of ourselves. And even shame has a touch of narcissism in it. We're still looking at ourselves. So I want to, lift up to you that shame doesn't have to be, and in my opinion, shouldn't be our response to being called out on our racism. Shame isn't healthy. A little guilt might be good, but what we're really trying to do is see what he's talking about and see how we got here, and hopefully be more awakened to our own and move forward, do some creative brainstorming on innovations in moving forward as we're trying to look at how do we help not just Emmanuel, but the ELCA as a denomination thrive and grow. As Pastor Duncan says, aren't we tired of a narrative of decline? We need to move into new spaces. So I'm going to see if I can share again here. Yes, I can share. What I'm doing here is trying to put Pastor Duncan in, shall we say, sociological perspective. And here he is, Dear Church, a love letter to the widest denomination in the US. I've put my email here if you want to email me. I'm going to convert these slides to PDF and send them to Kathy, and perhaps post them somewhere if you were interested in sending them on, or you could email me and I'll send them to you. Let's open with a prayer here. Creator God, your world is diverse by design. Help us investigate our own implicit bias so that we are radically loving to those who need to hear your word and join our community of love and faith. Amen. This is Pastor Lenny Duncan. He's a mission developer now in Messiah Lutheran Church in Vancouver, Washington. When you see his Advent greeting on next Sunday, it's when he's in seminary. And one of the things he's going to tell us is he doubts a traditional Lutheran church will ever hire him. And so he will be, he'll have to just default to becoming a mission developer, meaning calling into being the church he wants to serve. And that is exactly what happened. He ended up as a mission developer. No one hired him in the traditional Lutheran church. So today we're going to look at the sociological dimensions influencing racism and Lutheranism, and the theological dimensions on December 13th. Whoops. Here's some guidelines for discussion of racism. It's a tough topic. The purpose is to grow and to check in with ourselves and to figure out how to do that. So be sensitive and thoughtful and speak from a place of heart. I want to read number 3 to you here because I'm inviting you into a conversation. America is in a cultural shift on race. We are having an awakening. I want you to feel invited into a conversation, a national identity, an opportunity to contribute our Christian understandings of love and inclusion to the national conversation. You have something to contribute to the nation and to the church today. You have something to contribute. Here's my philosophy of racism. We are all infected. Of course, we all have racist views in some ways. It was laid down in our childhoods. But that's not our destiny. We can dig it out, make it conscious, and grow away from these views. So I'm of the belief, I've been working in racism and white awareness training for 35 years. I wrote a curriculum for our predecessor body, the Lutheran Church of America, on white awareness training, how to train white people in Lutheranism to understand how they do have implicit bias. Are we any more diverse in the last 35 years than we were 100 years ago? After 50 years of intentional diversity efforts? No. So what are we doing wrong and what are we doing right? What the Bible says about racism is it's a sin. We make differences and assign status to them, but Jesus came to break through difference to create community. Our world needs to hear that lesson from us. We have a prophetic voice in the national conversation on race. And here's something even more important, I think, when we talk about racism and Lutheranism. Be careful that the exercise of your rights does not become a stumbling block to others. The whole, we've always done it this way before, this is the Lutheran identity, all of those are natural resistances to change. And we need to rethink them, I think, because if we're doing something that keeps our Black or brown sisters and brothers away from our communities, we need to stop whatever that is. That's not the gospel. Here's Pastor Lenny Duncan. The ELCA hasn't led in naming and shaming racism in its ranks or in America today. He's making very loving declarative statements in his book, and he is trying to sort of lift up to us where we have been lazy and we have been not doing sort of the emotional labor of confronting racism in our denomination. We've been too comfortable. They say that being a pastor means that you afflict the comfortable and you comfort the afflicted. So he's afflicting our comfort with our white privilege. Here's a shocking fact. The racial composition of the ELCA, 96% white. Here's the Episcopal, the Methodist, the Presbyterian, all pretty darn white, but we are 96% white. How did we get here? Let's look at how the Lutheran Church in America was formed. In the 1800s, the East Coast was settled primarily by German Lutherans. I don't know if you've ever been down like Route 11 in the Shenandoah Valley, Muhlenberg Lutheran Church, all the way to Harrisonburg, all the way to Roanoke. German Lutheranism on the East Coast, and then Swedish and Norwegian Lutheranism in the Dakotas, Minnesota, Indiana, etc. The ELCA, a predecessor body headquartered, I think it was in Minneapolis. And in 1988, these two denominations, East Coast and Midwest, merged into the ELCA. But our history is of whiteness, German whiteness, Scandinavian whiteness. But is our history our destiny? Origins alone can't explain why 200 years later, and after 50 years of intentional diversity efforts by the ELCA, we're still 96% white. If there's something about our denomination that makes Black or brown Christians stay away, whatever it is an impediment to our sharing of the gospel. And sharing the gospel is our job as church. Why aren't we more diverse as a denomination? I'm going to stop sharing here and ask you that question. Why aren't we more diverse as a denomination? What keeps us from attracting a more diverse church membership? Why are we stalled on the issue of racial diversity?
Well, we tend to interact with people that look like us. That's just normal. That's true with the Black churches in some respects, but each church has its own neighborhood, if you will, kind of thing. And the lack of interaction, I think, of understanding diversity and being comfortable, I think is one of the issues that it's hard to break the culture because in some respects, even our communities are segregated in some respect, although Emmanuel does not look like the population that surrounds it. Mm-hmm. We've said that time and time again, that we need to do it. But I think it's a cultural thing of people choosing to work with people that they feel comfortable with.
Mm-hmm. 11 o'clock on Sunday is called by sociologists the most segregated hour in America. Uh-huh. We go where we're comfortable. Who else? Why are we so white? What prevents us from being more diverse after 50 years of intentional diversity efforts by the ALC, the LCA, and the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America? Why are we stalled on this issue, do you think?
Yeah, I would say for Roy, you saying that people were in their communities, and I think that there's a lot of Lutheran churches that were in cities that have closed and people, have moved away, and that, the problem is that we have not changed and been open to other things. I think that, we're very traditional. We like our traditional liturgy. We like, our traditional things. And I think that that's part of why we have stayed stagnant, is that hanging on to those traditions rather than feeling. I mean, look at how there's very many people that don't like the band and don't feel that that's, sacred music, and so if that's where we're stuck, how that's where we are, that, so we're not open to new ideas and new forms that make other people more comfortable. We like being in our comfort zone. We like having our traditions, and that we say, this is what we have, come join us, be like us, not going to where they are and and bringing them in. So.
Excellent. I'm going to move forward on the slides and share my screen with you again. And we'll hear some quotes from Pastor Duncan about how he is making some suggestions about what is really at place in our stalled conversation on race in America. Systemic racism, white supremacy, it is a problem in the ELCA. We need to ask, is power and status coded as white in Lutheranism? And I think the answer is yes. You why don't we have more Black bishops? Why don't we have, we celebrated the election of our first female bishop of the ELCA. And, you know, I've learned over time, I mean, to celebrate these firsts, but they are a source of shame. It's essentially our denomination saying, oh, okay, for the last 200 years, we've been prejudiced against women in leadership. We're prejudiced against non-whites in leadership in the ELCA. So a first is something to be celebrated. I myself in 1977, I look back on this with some embarrassment. I won the first Rotary International Fellowship. And it was much brouhaha. The Rotary Clubs of America have these international fellowships that they award. I was the first woman to win one in 1977. I was 22 years old. I was strutting around like I had done something wonderful. And I thought, you know, all these other women, you know, for the past 50 years that have applied for this and not gotten it, I'm better than them. And that lasted for about 2 minutes, until I realized that the Rotary Clubs of America were being sued by women to allow women to attend their Rotary Club meetings each week. And so they were quickly doing things to look more diverse. It wasn't about me. I was no better or worse than all the other women that had applied for that. And so I think we have to really look at, why is it a first? It's because of how do we perceive non-whites? How do we perceive women in leadership? Do we code power and status as white in Lutheranism? Here's another quote. It's time to stop prioritizing tradition and civility over the lives of the marginalized. We are well-meaning, and we are tolerant and welcoming, but how do you face radical evil, the evil of prejudice, of implicit bias that suppresses the lives and the career ambitions, for example, of our Black Lutheran pastors, or just being more welcoming? How do we change so that we look more welcoming, not just act more welcoming? Are questions that Pastor Duncan asks of us. Here's another quote: taking apart the cage that Black peoples find themselves in Lutheranism also starts to dismantle the gilded cage our white siblings find themselves in. A cage is a cage. So let's talk about that. How is white privilege, and even that term is so offensive to a lot of people. When I first heard that term, white privilege, I myself came out of an abusive childhood, and I paid for every penny of my own college education and graduate school, $100,000 of debt by myself, working 2 jobs and trying to maintain a good grade point average to get more scholarships. So you're telling me I have privilege? I did it on my own. Nobody gave me a handout. These are the tapes inside my head when I hear the term white privilege. But just being white had me closer to the goal line than people who may have had my exact same childhood and were not white. And so I was still closer to the goal line than they are. So does white privilege harm us and harm our ability to evangelize, to reach out to other communities? If so, what do we do about that? What do we do about that? Who would like to respond to Pastor Duncan and his questions here?
I think part of it is that we addressing the issue and kind of thinking differently to be able to recognize that we have some implicit bias, the unconscious thinking or the way that we have been thinking all along maybe isn't the whole picture, and to be open to some new ideas and perspectives that we can change the way that we think.
Mm-hmm. And
Dr. Mao believes that this separation of activity is one of the issues that, first of all, to not feel guilty for being white, for one thing. You were born white. I mean, there's nothing you can do about it. But the fact is that understanding how you may further interaction with people to start seeing people as human beings versus color. And until that interaction occurs, you can cognitively say, oh, I'm not going to be prejudiced or something, but you cannot internalize it until there is some interaction that occurs. And it seems to me that this separateness, the only way we are going to get past it is that if we have very concrete interactions with other minorities in order to begin looking at people as human beings. Otherwise, it's just we and they, really. And what can we do about being less racist? That's not going to get it. There has to be some action accordingly.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that some of the action that's needed is for us to demand from our pastors and our bishops that we want change, starting from the higher ups, if that's where it has to go. I mean, we can, unless we want to change this one church radically, nothing's going to happen. Mm-hmm. And do you want to leave the ELCA and start your own branch of Lutheranism, like Nadia Bolz-Weber practically had to do, and like this pastor is doing? I mean, we can sit here and we can talk to ourselves all we want, but if we don't get Pastor Tony and say to him, look, you need to be talking to the higher ups there. Why did it take us so long to get Pastor Lydia? Why do we not have a Black bishop wandering around talking to all of us every week at different churches? Why don't we have a Spanish? Why don't we have a different nationality? I mean, other than I think changing our church completely, we might have to give up this ELCA place and find our own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Bill?
I think we need to do a little homework on our own. Certainly, I think it's important to have Black leaders in visible positions and perhaps Black theologians and seminaries and so forth. But I think we ourselves need to do a little homework into Black culture. Now, we've kind of been thrust into it in the last several months, and a lot of us have been reading everything from So You Want to Talk About Racism to Waking Up White to all kinds of books and things that are out there. But if we're going to, for example, just invite someone from the Black community, hey, come and try Emmanuel. Are you just going to go ask that person? Because as you pointed out, Lauve, America is a very segregated time when it comes to worship. Well, maybe we need to figure out, so how does the Black culture worship? What are Black people comfortable in? And of course, there's all kinds of ways to Google that and find out, or show up at Alfred Street Baptist Church down in Alexandria. That'll give you that's an exciting experience. But anyway, we need to do a little bit more homework. And bringing it right home, let's talk about the housing across the street from Emmanuel. Why aren't those people, many of whom are Hispanic, and I honestly don't know if there are Black people over there, but there are a whole lot of Hispanics over there. Why aren't we inviting them? Now we have them come to some of our, I think some of the kids who come to our preschool, but why aren't we inviting them to worship? For heaven's sake, all I got to do is walk across the street.
You know what, Bill, I just wanted to tell you, we do. The Emmanuel Lutheran Church does. Good.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Go ahead, please. I'll listen.
Well, yeah, and I think everything you're saying is amazing, and they do every week invite all of the children who need extra homework, and their adults and other kids who help them. A lot of them are Louise Archer children, and so the kids know each other and they're happy to see each other, and they hug people like when they arrive. So I think there is this, and that's new with Pastor Tony, and I think it's been a phenomenal thing. Obviously it's stopped now with the pandemic, but that's, you know. The other thing I just wanted to say really quickly is that we also all participated, a lot of us did, in that Juneteenth rally at the first Black church in Vienna. And the pastor there, I know, was working with Pastor Tony. And to be honest with you, I would love it if our congregation would attend church there when we all can attend church. What a way to, right? Like, start at home. I was there. All I wanted to do was hug everybody that day. And we were all masked up, you know, and we were in our own little silos. But I am waiting to get and sit down in that church, because that is a moment, like you said, Bill, let's do a little bit of research. Well, let's just sit and watch and listen and share.
And there's history for that. When Pastor Beth was here, I know I attended a Martin Luther King service at that church, and Pastor Beth spoke. And I think there were 3 of us from Emmanuel that went, but it was open invitation. And so, I mean, I know there's a willingness on that congregation's part to interface. And as you said, Pastor Tony had talked with them before the whatever that event was called. But I think, I don't want it to feel like we've not tried. This congregation may be even unique in its level of effort when it comes to trying to reach into the community. And I know that the postcards went out specifically to the apartments across the street.
And Jane,
not that there's not tons of work to do, but it's not like we've had our heads in the sand totally. And besides, you know what the biggest population is around us? Asian.
Mm-hmm. And Jane,
has anyone gone?
I mean, across the street, rats.
Yes, well, yes, we did. That was a long time ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, geography has something to do with it. And I'm really happy to hear about the worship at a Black church, because living in New Orleans, I explored a lot of different churches. I did end up going to a Methodist church because of the preschool that worked for my daughter and the location. But there is such an amazing way that they worship. And I have a friend, he's in charge of the whole department at Lifetime for personal training. And I sometimes slip in and I'll watch on Zoom his services. They are extemporaneous, they pray, it's just a whole different energy. And geography is very challenging here. We're in Vienna, so, but to hear that we're making those efforts to, okay, I didn't even know there was a Black church in Vienna. Yay. That's a good thing. So, it's a cultural thing too. I mean, culturally, it's just different how it's been expressed or what songs they sing. So I think having that, try to, this time is very unique, but to try to reach out, there is our opportunity, in my opinion. That would be the best opportunity that it sounds like we have.
This is one of the great things about COVID. We can go to church anytime we want to, anywhere we want to.
Yep.
Click on First Baptist Church in Vienna. Christy, as you're saying, you'll get a real glimpse into how they worship, or Alfred Street Baptist, or any one of a number of other Black churches in the community. Just Google Black churches near Vienna and see what pops up, and then listen to their services. Shiloh Baptist in Tyson's Corner is another example. Oh, by the way, they have a church there. Nobody lives there. They can't afford to live there. They all commute from 20 miles away to come to church there. But nevertheless, Christy, thanks for suggesting that. It's a great way to learn about how the Black culture worships.
And you know, our youth used to have regular exposure. Remember when they would go down on their Habitat mission things? They would come back so energized, and they had attended Black churches. And they came back and they spoke differently. They were really jazzed up, having experienced
and remember,
worship with joy.
If anybody's interested, Emmanuel is creating a task force on diversity. So if you're interested, you should tell Pastor Tony that you want to be part of diversity. The thing about the diversity is that we need all views. For us to ignore that there may be negative views in our congregation would be a major mistake. And to say that, oh, that's a nice service and they have a nice service is not really going to help us much. It's more the interaction of understanding people as human beings before behavior changes in this regard. So I just wanted to mention the diversity task force thing, then I'll be quiet.
And since we're talking about Black Baptist churches, 25 years ago, Augustana Lutheran downtown DC had a large African-American congregation component. It changed its whole worship. It rewrote the traditional Lutheran liturgy to be more vibrant and alive and responsive. Sociologists call the Lutheran Church in America the frozen chosen. We're called, we stand up, sit down, kneel, stand up, sit down, kneel. And so there is a way of loosening up in worship and participating more and feeling the Holy Spirit move us into action and compassion and connection, I think.
So I'm sorry, can I just jump in? It sounds to me like we're talking about two different things, though. On the one hand, we're talking about learning about other people's way of worshiping and other groups of churches and that sort of thing. I think that's what maybe you were getting at, Roy. I don't think, unless I'm totally misunderstanding, our goal is not to take people from those churches and have them become Lutherans, but our goal is to make our church more integrated and figure out, what's going on. So it's great to learn about, but the people that we want to attract or welcome are people who aren't going to those churches either. So it seems to me there are two different things. One is to learn about other churches, and the other one is to sort of integrate ours. And that's where I would go with what Deb was just saying. I would think this needs to come from the top, because when I think of it, I think, well, we just set up, but we set up this communion with two or three other, you guys can correct me, Protestant churches, where we can trade pastors and that sort of thing. So to me, the question would be, would we want to, should from the top, we be setting up communion, full communion, with churches that don't look so much like us? Maybe theologically they're similar, but they don't look so much like us in other ways. And that would be the way that we start to really integrate. I don't know, I might be taking you totally out of not understanding what you were saying, Deb, but to me, it seems like it's two different issues. And one is one we can go from the bottom up, and one is that we can go from the top down. And now I'll mute myself again.
No, excellent. I would suggest we need both. We need a multi-pronged approach on all factors. But as Duncan is suggesting to us, it might be something theological that is keeping Black Americans, Black seekers away. And we're going to look at what those are next week. But generally speaking, he's talking about liturgy. He's talking about Advent theology. And he's talking about the way we do worship that doesn't speak to a Black American soul in ways that it could and should. And I'll just give you an example. Is in Advent theology, we talk all the time about from darkness into light. And I am very attached to that kind of theology of awakening, of being, Jesus is the light of the world. But are we in that kind of theology talking about Black is bad, white is good? And so if we're continually using theology that rings a bell of privilege and racism, we need to refocus, he argues, next week, Advent theology, so that we're looking at the impoverishment of where Jesus was born, an unwed mother, essentially, and the impoverishment of being a wandering. And there are ways of interrogating power. Or we could say, as Duncan says, of allowing the gospel's interrogation of power to really be heard and proclaimed, rather than use language that is offensive to people who may be church shopping and might want to, maybe lonely, maybe isolated, and they just don't see themselves in us, in our theology and in our liturgy. We just have a few minutes left, so I want to do a few more slides and then assign you your homework. It's not a real class until you have homework, right? So you're going to have homework, and we're going to talk about your homework next week. It's an easy task to do. You're going to be reading 4 pages, very, very short. So here's your homework. In chat, in just a minute, I'm going to give you a link to a story by Shirley Jackson. And you're going to count the moments of implicit bias in that story. It's just like 3.5 pages. And it's about a woman whose son comes home, young son comes home for lunch during the day, and she's cooking him lunch, and he brings a Black friend. And it's just fascinating and charming, the story. But there are moments of implicit bias in us will wake us up to what's going on there. I want to give you some resources for being an anti-racist. Kitty and Laura Gerke and a couple other people did How to Be an Anti-Racist book club, adult forums and book club sessions this summer. They did sort of the initiating work on this. I'm going to give you some more links. One is How Racism Invented Race by Ta-Nehisi Coates. And that article blew the top of my head off. It is fabulous. He's essentially saying, I'm just going to give you his argument in one sentence, that there have always been people with different skin color, but it took prejudice against people of other skin colors to invent racism and race, meaning the difference, the hierarchicalization of race. All these are free online. The Case for Reparations. White Fragility is a book, but here is her article on it that essentially contains all her points in her book. Here's White Awareness Training by Judith Katz, if you want to have a workshop kind of book. Here is the social statement for the ELCA on race, ethnicity, and culture. And I'm reading a book now called Caste, The Origin of Our Discontents. And here's a quote that is fabulous. Caste is the granting or withholding of respect, status, honor, attention, privileges, resources, benefit of the doubt, human kindness to someone on the basis of their perceived rank or standing in the hierarchy. So there's some resources for you. In chat, I'm going to put the link to the After You, My Dear Alphonse link for your homework next week. And what we're going to do next week is look at the specific theological points, liturgical points that Duncan is lifting up to us as how they sound, how they resonate on the Black American ear. And we may not even be aware of how bad they sound or even how racist we sound sometimes. And I think the only way to accept his prophetic challenge is to learn how to apologize for our ignorance and sometimes the things we missay. And just to say, as Bill said, teach me, I'm listening, I want to learn, and not slide into shame. Maybe feelings of a little guilt aren't so bad, but just to be willing to give up some of our cultural identity as Lutherans in order to be less like the frozen chosen and to be willing to grow and reject this narrative of Lutheran decline. So I'm going to close and say a prayer, and then you are free to ask any questions the last minute. Would you join me in prayer? Creator God, you have created a world that is diverse by design. We sin when we are comfortable, when we are clutching our privileges so that we don't have to grow. You have given us, Lord, in response to that decline. Help us see the Jesus in everyone and respond with grace. In your name we pray. Amen. Any final comments? Any?
I just read the beginning pages. I've ordered the book, Duncan's book, and in his beginning pages, it was the theology of the Lutheran Church that pulled him in. Mm-hmm. It wasn't the songs being sung in the church that he visited. It was the people who welcomed him, who did not judge him despite all his tattoos and whatever. It was the theology of welcoming and love that brought him to the Lutheran Church. So we have the basis of what we need. But how did he walk through that door? I haven't read the book, so I don't know what brought him into that white community in the first place. That's I think what we need to figure out for those who are seeking, to Desiree's point, to those that are seeking what makes us attractive. We don't have to totally change who we are, just take off the rough edges, right?
Yeah. Grace is the most magical theology we have. That is part of our brand, is that we're both saints and sinners according to Luther and Lutheran theology and grace. We don't deserve it. We can't earn it. And it's just a gift that we can accept and receive with humility. So I hope to see everyone back next week, and we'll dig down into his theology, and you'll receive an Advent blessing from him in a video that we'll get started with next Sunday. So thank you for your willingness to do this work and step into this space. This is what will move us forward.
Thank you, Lauve.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lauve.
Good to see
I'll
everyone.
be dancing next Sunday at church if anybody wants to come and dance.
Wonderful. With ribbons?
I don't know yet. It's my last Sunday for a couple Sundays, so I figure, why not?
I'll dance with you, Deb. Come on, let's do it.
You're the two in Revelation that do dance.
Yeah.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Good to see you.
Thank you. Bye, guys.